Hey coders, welcome to another exciting video on my channel, CS with NJ. In this video, we are going to learn all about pagination, how to implement the logic behind the concept of pagination. This is the demo that I have created. Currently, we are on the landing page where you can see all the properties. Currently, you can see the names of 10 properties. But as you can see over here, we have more pages to display further properties. We are currently on page 1, and because this is the first page, therefore the previous page is disabled. If we click on this page 2, then this previous will be enabled because then we can go back to the previous page. So let's click on this. And now you can see the other properties, and over here you can see the query string attached. Earlier we didn't have any query string attached. Now if we go to the previous one, you can still see the query string attached. So when we start, we don't have any query string, but we are still viewing the page 1. We go to page 2, and if we come back to page 1, now we have query string attached. So basically we have two variations of the first properties. Without query string, we are still seeing the properties, and if we have query string with page 1, we can still see the same properties. Anyways, we can go to the page 3, then the page number changes in the URL as well. Page 4, and if you notice, every time you can see the page reloading in the browser. That's because every time you click on any of these buttons, a separate request goes to the backend and bring back the reply, and this whole page gets reloaded into the browser. So you can think of this as implementing pagination in a more traditional way. The other way is in the style of single page applications, in which when you click on these buttons, the data changes over here, but the page is not reloaded in the browser. So for that, we have another variation. So this one is more like a single page application because once the page is loaded, if you click on the other pages, you can see the data changes over here. However, you don't see any refresh icon into the reload mode. And you can also notice our URL is also a clean URL. You don't see the query string with page number, the current page number in the URL either. So this is another variation, but we are going to start with implementing this more traditional one. Then probably in the next video, we will move on to how to implement this as well. So let's start with this one. When we come to the last page, the next gets disabled because now we don't have any next properties to display. So let's click over here on the one, and you can see the next is enabled. If we click over here, we move on to page 2. Click over here, we move on to page 3. So this is the logic that we are going to learn to implement today without the help of any libraries. So let's get started. Okay, so now in the project that we are building, we have two files. First one is index.php. This is currently empty. And second one is style.css. That's because in this video, we will not be covering the CSS styles. Our aim is to understand the logic behind the CSS pagination. However, we have to look presentable in the browser as well. So that's why I have already brought in the CSS styles over here. But don't worry, I will make those styles available when I upload the project on Buy Me a Coffee page as well. Okay, so for this index.php file, we are going to implement both PHP logic as well as the HTML code. So for PHP logic, let's bring in the codes, the starting and the closing tags in which we will define the logic. Then we are going to generate the boilerplate code for our HTML. So this is the boilerplate code, and we are simply going to link our CSS file over here. The name is style.css, that's fine. Now in the body, let's first of all define h1, pagination. Now after the heading, we are going to define an unordered list where we are going to display the properties. So let's give it a class name, properties. So this is where we are going to list all of these properties as an unordered list. And then we are going to define a div which is going to contain these buttons. So these are basically anchor elements. We are going to have one anchor element for the previous button, another one for the next button, and rest of these, because this part is dynamic, depending on how many properties we have in the database, this number can shrink or increase. So this part is going to be dynamic, but all of them are anchor elements. So let's define a div which is going to contain all of these buttons. Let's come outside the unordered list. Currently it's empty. Now let's properties, and over here pagination buttons. So let's define a div with the class name pagination. And this is going to contain previous button, next button, and all the intermediate buttons, numbered buttons. Now before we define any logic for the HTML, we need to bring in the data which is going to be incorporated into the browser through HTML. So first of all, we have to define the PHP logic. So now we need to make a request to our backend. And at the backend, we have our database which contains all the properties. For the database, I am using this real estate database. I have created this database for another project which is also available on the YouTube, where we built a full stack PHP based web application for real estate businesses. Anyway, so this is the table, property table. Now this contains many columns, but we are interested in just name because we are just making a proof of concept pagination. We don't need to display all of this data. We will only be displaying the property name because again, our focus is understanding the pagination logic, not to overwhelm you with the rest of the nitty-gritties. Okay, so over here now we have to first of all make a connection with the database. So for that we are going to use the connection variable and we are going to interact with our database using MySQLi. It takes 4 parameters. The first one is the where our database host is residing. So it's kind of a location. So basically it can also be an IP address or a proper URL where our database is residing. Since our database on the local machine, so localhost. Then the second parameter is the username through which we are going to connect with that machine. The third one is the password. I don't have any password, so I'm going to keep it empty. And the final one is going to be the actual database to which you want to connect to. So over here, we are interested in connecting with real estate underscore DB database. So real estate DB. Now we have to set the limit for our query that we will be making. So basically what I mean is, as you can see on each page, you are seeing 10 properties. So this is the limit. We have lots of properties in our database, but in one single go, we want to see just 10 properties. So on page 3, we have 10 properties. On page 1, we have 10 properties. Then on page 2, we have next 10 properties. On page 3, we have further next 10 properties. So from property 1 to 10, we are displaying on page 1. From property 11 to 20, we are displaying on page 2. And from property 21 to 30, and so on, we are displaying on the respective pages. So this is what is meant by limit. We are going to set the limit. Now limit can be bigger than 10 or less than 10. Since in our demo project, we have limit set to 10. So let's change the limit over here to something else. This is completely up to us. There is no hard and fast rule regarding the number to choose as limit. However, the number is usually big enough to cover the browser space. Now this limit tells us total number of rows or properties returned per request, but it does not tell us which of those properties to be returned back. For example, over here, we have all of these properties. So 8 only just tells us to return us the 8 properties, but which of these 8 properties to be returned back? So we also have to define this aspect. And for that, we are going to define this aspect through another parameter or another variable, which is going to be called offset. But we can't straight away tell you 6 or 10 or 1 or 70, 67 or any number, because if we define any constant number, then offset will not change and always the same properties will be returned. So we want this offset to keep changing. For example, when we make the very first request to our backend, we should be returned properties 1 to 8. And in the second request, the properties should be 9 to 16. And in the third one, the properties should be 17 to onwards. So this offset needs to change. So basically this offset will tell us how many properties to skip before returning the next 8 properties. So we can't put a constant over here. We need to define a formula over here, which will keep on skipping the properties which we have already seen previously. And the logic that we are going to define for this offset is basically coming from this query URL. So if the page is 3, that means we are seeing, let's set our limit to 10 because it's easier to do the calculations. So let's make it 10. So doubling it is going to be easier compared to 8. So it's 10, 20, 30, 40. So it's easier to explain with this number 10. Okay. So when the page number is 3, that means we are seeing the properties 31 to 40. When the page number is 4, we are seeing the properties 41 to 50. So this page number is playing a crucial role. So what we are going to do is we are going to say we are using this global variable get because from this variable we can access this query parameter. This page is a query parameter. We can access it through the global variable get. Okay. So from here we will get the page number and now we have to times it with the limit. So if page number is 1, then timing it by limit means we are moving on to 10. So the offset will start from 11 to 20. If the page number is 2, then timing it with limit will make it 20. So the properties that will be returned will be skipping those first 20 properties and giving you the next 10 properties likewise. But if you notice, when we start at the very beginning, we don't have any query parameter and we are still seeing the first 10 properties. So in the absence of this page number, this page is going to be empty. So we have to fix this part. So let's enclose it within the parentheses and we can say this double question mark is null coalescing operator. So if this get is empty, then return us 1. So hopefully this will work. But before we test it out, let's fix one more thing. So we know this, whatever we return from this get global variable, it will always be of type string. So even if we get number 2, because 2 will be string, we can run into problems while multiplying it with the limit. So what we are going to do is that we are going to convert this into an integer. So we are enclosing this whole thing. So if we return this string 2, eventually it will be converted into integer 2 and multiplied by limit. So for the time being, what we are going to do is that we are going to just echo out our offset to see what's happening and then exit. So localhost, and the project that we are building is PHP Pagination. Okay, so we can see the 10 over here because there is no query string attached. So this 1 was returned and it got multiplied by 10, so we got the 10 offset. Now let's attach the query string page equals 2 and we got 20. If we change the page to 3, we get 30. If the page is 1, we get the 10 back, and if we don't have any page at all, still works, we get the 10. So our offset and limit are set. Now let's move on to defining the query. So before we define the query, there is another thing that we have to fix, which is, let's come to the demo project. So we have to figure out how many properties in total we have so that we can decide how many of these buttons to display over here in the pagination div. For example, if we have 100 properties, then obviously we are going to need 5 more buttons, so 6 to 10. So buttons with numbers from 6 to 10 will also be added over here. So in order to figure out how many button anchors to display over here, we should know in advance that how many properties we actually have in the browser. So we are going to fix this part now. So basically, we need to make 2 different set of requests to the browser. In the first part, we will ask for the total number of properties because we have to figure out how many buttons to place in the browser. And in the second query, we will actually be asking for the properties to be returned back. So we have 2 different set of queries. So let's start with the first one. Count total records. So basically, we want to know how many properties do we have. So records, each row in database table is called record. So that's why count total records. So let's create a variable records. Now let's define a query using the connection variable. We are using the query method on this connection object, and as a parameter we are passing in the actual query. Select, we are only interested in the number of rows, so we are using the count method defined in the MySQL. So we basically want to count all rows, so count asterisk, and we want to give it an alias total. So this count will be returned back to us as a column named total. Now we have to define the name of the property. The table, name of the table, and the name of the table is property. So property. So this is query. So now as we know that this query is going to return us a result set which is going to be stored over here. So now we have to get this total from this result set. So for that, what we are going to do is, so from the records, we are going to use a method fetch assoc. So this will return us each row as an associative array. And let's create another variable total records. So now from this row, we are going to access an index named this variable total. So now, before we move any further, let's echo out how many records have we been returned. So total records, then exit. So this is the project we are working on. Let's refresh. Now it returns us 47. That means we have 47 total rows in the property table. So we have 47 properties. Okay, so now we have got the number of properties, but we still have to figure out number of pages to display over here. So if we have 47 properties, then we need at least 5 pages. This number 1 will contain first 10 rows. This one will contain next 10 rows. So 20, 30, 40. This one will contain the 7 rows. So now we have to figure out a formula which will calculate the number of buttons out of that number 47, which is being displayed over here. So now let's create another variable for calculating total pages. So total pages is going to be total records divided by this limit. Now let's first of all display what does we get after this. So let's echo this out. So total pages and then exit. Let's comment this and comment this as well. Okay. Let's refresh, and we got 4.7. So now we have to convert this into whole value because we can't put 4.5 buttons on the screen. So either we can go higher and convert this 4.7 into 5, or we can come down and make this just 4. So if we come down and make it 4, then the last page, the page number 5, it will not be displayed. So when we are rounding this value, we always have to go next higher value, not the lowest value. So what we are going to do is that we are enclosing this into parentheses because we are passing it as a parameter to a function called ceiling. So ceiling means the roof, which is the highest value. The other thing is floor. If we use floor, we will be returned the lowest whole number. But we are interested in getting the next highest whole number. So we are using ceiling function. Refresh, and we got the 5. So now this number will decide how many buttons to place in the browser. Okay, so this part is also done. Now we are finally ready to access the actual properties and display them in the browser. So let's comment this out and this as well. So let's define the query. Fetch the records for the current page, and the query is going to be select. In order to make it simple, we use asterisk. We can otherwise use the column name as well. The column name we are interested in, this one property name as well, but let's make it simple. Asterisk, so that means select everything from property table. Now we have to define the limit and offset. So limit will tell us just to bring this much number of rows. So for the limit, this is the keyword limit. Now we have to define the actual value. So it's coming from this limit variable. Paste. But now we also have to tell that how many properties to skip before returning the result set. So for that we have this offset keyword in MySQL, and now we have to define or give the value, which is obviously going to come from the offset variable. Okay, so this is query. So basically we are saying give us 10 properties at a time, and this offset is telling us to skip how many properties before returning those next 10 properties. The limit is static, but offset keeps changing because the page number keeps changing. So this value will always be different for each HTTP request to the database. Now let's create a variable data and use the connections query method. Pass in that SQL statement, and this will return us the result set. So we are not doing this logic over here, this processing. We are not doing this kind of processing over here. That will be done over here in the HTML part, because now this contains 10 actual property names which we want to display in the browser over here. So that's why we have to go to this unordered list, and over here we have to display all of those properties. So we are going to use while loop, but because the data is coming from PHP, so we have to use PHP tags over here. This is the starting PHP tag and this is the ending one. And we have to use while loop, while. Let's get data and apply fetch a sock function, method on it, because this data is actually the result set returned through this query. So this is our data set on which we are calling the fetch a sock function. That means whatever has been returned to us, convert it into an associative array. Now the actual data, we want to display it as a list item like this. So that means we have to terminate this part of while statement over here with colon. Basically this means that the while statement hasn't terminated and the other part is going to come next. So in the li, we are going to continue with this while statement. This li is HTML. Okay, so within this li, we are going to say, basically because we have to say whatever has been returned. Now because this fetch a sock is going to return us associative array, so we are going to store it in another variable. Otherwise, whatever gets returned will be lost. So we are returning it in this item variable. Now over here, what we simply want to do is we want to say echo item property name. This is we want to do. But because within the HTML tags, we can't do direct PHP. So we have to enclose it within these starting and closing PHP tags. So this is PHP and this is the ending PHP tag. So echo, we can do this. We need semicolon. So it becomes something like this. Okay. When we use this kind of while statement with a colon, so we have to close this while loop with the end while statement. So after this li, we have to use another set of PHP starting and closing tags, and we have to write and while. So this is the start of the while loop. This is the end of the while loop. Okay, let's refresh. Unexpected variable. Okay, unexpected variable data on line 22. Okay, semicolon is missing over here. Okay, so we got these 10 rows. Now let's change the limit from 10 to 5. Let's refresh, and we are only getting these 5 properties. So this part is working fine. We, however, do not have these links over here. So now we have to work on that part. But before doing that, we can simplify this. So whenever we are creating this starting and closing PHP tag, so that we can just echo out something, we can shorthand this part by eliminating echo and starting PHP keyword by replacing it with this one equal sign. So this thing means a starting PHP tag with echo in it. So we don't have to explicitly type in the echo. So this is a shorthand. Let's refresh. And we are getting these 5 properties. So it's still working, echoing out the data in the browser. Okay, so this part is working. Now we can move further. However, this is not important for this project, but we can enclose this within another function. Basically, we can pass this as a parameter to another function, which is special characters. Passing any data that we have received from the database and the other way around, any data that the user submits and you want to store it in the backend, you can pass it through this HTML special characters. This will protect us against XSS cross-site scripting attacks, XSS attacks or cross-site scripting attacks. Again, not necessary. If you don't know about it, leave it. This is one additional thing I just wanted to point out. Okay, so now we are ready to work on this pagination div. So basically, this pagination div consists of 3 parts: the previous div, next div, and these buttons. So within this div, we have to define an anchor tag for previous div, previous button. So we need an anchor div for it. So the caption is going to be previous. What needs to come over here? We are going to get to that part later. Then we are going to have page link buttons. Let's skip this part first, and then we need next button. So this will contain an anchor tag as well. The caption is going to be next. So let's start with let's ignore previous and next buttons for the time being. Let's start with the actual buttons. Now, because we know this is going to come from this one, total pages, this variable. So we are going to use for loop over here. So PHP starting tag and closing tag over here, and in between for loop, index variable I, starting value 1 for I equals 1 until this I is less than or equal to total pages. Keep increasing I. Colon over here. Now we are going to define anchor tag for each of these i's or each iteration of this for loop, and the number is going to come from this I. So whatever is the i's value, let's make it the caption. Okay, so now, but because this time this I is actually a PHP variable, so we can't straight away write it like this previous or next, because previous and next is just text. However, this is a PHP variable. Therefore, we have to enclose it within the starting and closing PHP tags. So Control X, question mark, PHP, we have to do echo and then paste and then close this tag. So because this is PHP echo, so we can straight away use the short form. What happened? Okay, what's wrong over here for I equals? Okay, so we need semicolons over here. Sorry, not comma, semicolons. Let's have a peek. Refresh, syntax error, unexpected end of. Oh, okay. So now we have to end this for each loop. Okay. So over here we have to again start and close PHP and for loop. Refresh, and you can see these buttons. Okay, however, they won't do anything because the anchor hrefs are empty. We haven't defined, they are just decorative pieces. Now we still have the same 47 number of properties. However, we can see a lot more buttons compared to our demo project. That's because now our limit is 5. For the demo project, the limit was 10, but for the project that we are building, we have defined the limit to be 5. So now we have to convert these decorative anchor elements into actual proper working anchor elements. So let's start with the previous one over here. So now as far as this href is considered, what we actually need to place over here is a link for the previous page. So for example, so this is our demo project and we are currently on page number 4. If we click on this previous one, we will be taken to the one page back. So we will be taken to page number 3. And if we are currently on 3 and we click on the previous one, we will be taken to one page back, that is page number 2. So this is the logic. So the link over here is supposed to place whatever is the current page minus 1. So if for the href, we are going to provide this value. So this is a query string. This part is going to remain same. Therefore, for the hrefs, we will be using relative URLs. What relative URLs will do is that it will attach the relative part to the current URL rather than changing the whole URL altogether. If we wanted to change the whole URL altogether, we would go for the absolute URLs. But we only want to change this part, so we will be going with relative URLs. And in that URLs, we are only basically attaching the query string. So in the URL, if something starts with question mark, that means we are starting query string. In query string, we have key value pair. So this is the key or the variable name and this is its value. In the query string, this part is going to remain same for all of these links or all of these pages, only this number is dynamic. This keeps changing. So this part will come from the PHP and the rest we are going to place through static string. So over here, we are going to place in question mark and the key is page equal sign. Now the second part is going to be dynamic. It's going to come from PHP. So basically, we want to place in whatever is the current value. We want to put -1 and place it as the value of this previous. So that means we have to use this one. This global variable, get global variables page index. So since we will be using it at these different places for the previous, next and over here as well. So what we are going to do is that we are going to create a variable named page and cut this part, paste it over here. And now over here we can place in page. In fact, what we can do is that we can replace this whole thing. Let's paste it over here and take this back inside the over here. So original statement, and over here we can use page times limit. So we are getting the value of the page. If it's empty or not present, then give it 1. Otherwise, whatever is the value, assign it to page. Okay. So let's come down. And over here, because we have to echo out the page value, page -1. So we are going to go with the short form of PHP starting tag. So question mark equal to sign is equal to question mark PHP and echo. And now whatever is the value of page -1. This is going to be the value of previous. Okay, so this is our one. So because we haven't yet defined the hrefs for these links, so they are just for decoration. So let's attach manual string, query string. And let's make it page number 7. Now when we click on previous, because now the href for previous is defined, so we should be redirected to the page number 6. Let's see, click on page 6 and okay, we have 6, but let's put in semicolon. Okay, we have to remove this space. That's why a space was being inserted. Okay, 7. Now click on previous. We got redirected to 6 and the data changed as well. Again, click on previous and we got 5 and the data changed as well. Now, if we are on page number 1, okay, it won't work. So let's use the previous 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, when we click on, when we are on the page 1, this previous should get disabled because we don't have 0 or -1. These pages we do not have. So we should not be able to click on that previous page once we are already on the page 1. So for that, we are going to attach a class. Over here, class equals. Now, if we are on page 1, then this anchor tag should get disabled. Otherwise, it should remain enabled. So that means we have to use PHP logic over here as well. So question mark equal sign, because we are going to go with the echo as well. So what we are checking is, we are going to use the ternary operator. So parenthesis and parenthesis, we are checking if the value of page is less than or equal to 1. If that is the case, then question mark, we are going to attach the class list disabled. Otherwise, nothing. No class should get attached to this anchor tag. Now, for this disabled class, we have defined some styles. So for the disabled class, we have defined the color and the border color, and the pointer event is none. So when we set the pointer events to none, that means no click event or any kind of pointer event will take place. So let's come back to page 7 or 5. Okay, now previous 4, 3, 2, 1. Now it got disabled and we are not able to click on it. So this is the logic. Okay, so let's go back to index, and again we need to now copy paste everything from href to up to this part. So copy, paste it over here. Okay. So query string question mark page equal to, now because we are moving on to the next page, so plus 1, and for the class name we are attaching disabled, but logic is going to be when the page is greater than or equal to total pages. So the total pages is going to come from total pages. So copy and paste it over here. So keep us moving to the next page as long as the page that we are currently on is less than total pages. If it's equal to total pages or greater than the total pages, in that case disable this anchor tag or this button. Refresh. Now let's go, save, and let's refresh. So we are currently on page 1. Let's move on to page 7 again. Now, okay, page 7 we have to go manually because we haven't yet defined the logic for these buttons, the numbered buttons. So page 7, now click on next. Page 8, page 9, page 10. Okay, we should not have any page 10. Why have you got page 10? So we are going to fix this problem, but as you can see, when the page number is the current page, this next get disabled. Now let's go up and see what went wrong. So let's echo total records and then total pages. Copy, paste, then exit. Refresh. So on page 9 we should have 5 properties. On page 10 we should have 2 properties. Okay, so these numbers are correct. So 45 records we should have pages 1 to 9, and the last 2 records should be on page number 10. So what's wrong? Comment them out. Page 10 we have empty, but why? I have a feeling that once we define the anchor hrefs for these buttons, everything will fall into its place. So before we figuring out what's wrong, let's define the links for these ones, and if this problem still persists, then we will try to look for the reason. So let's work on these ones. So anyways, when we are on the page number 10, the last page, then this gets empty. Disabled. The next gets disabled. So these two are working fine. Now let's work on the rest of these anchor elements or the buttons. Okay. So let's come down. Okay. Let's copy everything between these quotations, including the quotations, and let's replace these empty quotations with that value. So paste. Now let's come back over here. We have to keep this question mark page equal to, because it's a static part of query string. Then for the page, it is going to be the current page. It's I. Because all of these are going to be the page number. So if this is the page, if this is the anchor element, then its query string should have question mark page equals 2. So we have to utilize this variable, the index variable I over here as its value. Then as far as this class is considered, so we have to attach the class active if I, the current value of this for loop, is equal to the current page in the query string. If the index I and page are the same, then attach this class active. Otherwise, don't attach anything. I think that was it. Page 9. Okay. Let's start at the beginning. So this is page 1. Previous is disabled. Click on page 2. Now previous gets enabled. Next, 4, 5. Okay, let's go to the previous. 4 Downtown Loft to Suburban Retreat. Next, Urban Apartment to Modern Flat. Next, Luxury Mansion to Seaside Apartment. Modern House to Beach House. Urban House to Luxury Condo. And we still have this problem 9, and then 10 is nothing. Okay, so I have identified the problem. The problem is with the logic. So before we go and show you the logic, what is wrong with the logic, let's click on page 1. And if you notice, the property has the name Charming Bungalow, and the last one, the 5th one, has the name Countryside Farmhouse. If we go to our properties, and if you notice, the first one has the name Modern Condo. The Charming Bungalow is the 5th one. Seaside Cottage is 7th one. Seaside Cottage, then Downtown Flat, Suburban House, and Countryside Farmhouse. downtown plate, suburban house, and countryside farmhouse. So the problem is on page 1, we are not actually seeing the 1st to 5th rows, rather we are seeing 5th to 10th rows. And that is where our logic is wrong. So this offset is supposed to skip whatever is the current value of offset. So if the offset is set to 5, then the first 5 will be skipped. So if you notice, for the very first time, when very first request is made, this page, if it's empty or it's page 1, the value will become 1. So 1 times 5 will become 5. So for the very first request to the backend, the first 5 rows gets skipped, whereas we wanted to skip those for page number 2. For the first page, we want this offset to be set to 0. So what we have to do is that we have to set whatever is the current value of page minus 1. So first time, when we make the very first request and the page value is 1, then 1 minus 1 becomes 0. And then we have to enclose it within the parentheses, otherwise this 1 would have gotten multiplied by limit first. So anyway, so if this is enclosed in the parentheses, now page minus 1 becomes, so when the value of page is 1, so 1 minus 1 becomes 0, and 0 minus limit, that is 5, becomes 0. So first time the offset is 0. So over here it will become, select everything from property and take 5 rows starting from or skipping the first 0 properties. So first 0 properties means the first 5 properties will be brought in. Over here, modern condo, luxury village, cozy apartment, townhouse, and urban loft. So hopefully now we have sorted out the problem. So let's refresh it. This is page 1 and we are seeing modern condo, luxury house, cozy apartment, and when it's nothing over here, we are again seeing modern condo, luxury villa, and everything. So let's click on page 9. We have 5 properties, and on 10 we have these 2 properties. So now our logic is working fine. So this is the end of our today's tutorial. I hope you learned a lot and you really liked my style of teaching. If you did, please do not forget to comment, like, subscribe, and share. And in the meantime, do not forget to check out other tutorials on my channel. I hope you will enjoy them as well. Happy coding!